reminder if they miss it today. All right, we are 2 minutes past 10 a.m. and we do have a lot to cover. So thanks again, everyone, for joining this morning. This is a great turnout. My name is Sam Kropp. I work with the Forest Climate Alliance Steering Committee, and I'm also one of the members of the Green New Deal Working Group. And we are really excited today to just be having this conversation, which we really hope is interactive, and more, we're calling it a workshop because this is about discussions and about kind of co-dreaming up how an idea like a Green New Deal for Pacific Northwest forests can happen on the ground. So we're gonna start just with Dylan, who is the bottom liner of the working group, giving a little bit of background and kind of the reason why we decided to put this document together. And that will be kind of more of a presentation format, but from there, we'll go into discussion. We're going to use the breakout room feature, and we're going to have discussions, kind of 2 rounds of discussions. One will be about just the platforms or the pillars of the Green New Deal platform, which we sent around, and we hope that everyone had an opportunity to read. And the other one will be a discussion about what this actually looks like on the ground, what we are doing right now and all of our different organizations and our work that connects with the ideas and the pillars in this piece. And then we'll end with MC going over our comms plan, because we have a very robust rollout plan, and she'll share with us how all of our organizations can help get this out there and make this a thing. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Dylan. Thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Hey, all. Thanks for showing up, and thanks, Sam, for that introduction. I'm sure many of y'all know me. My name's Dylan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the grassroots organizer with Cascadia Wildlands. And I've been working on this Green New Deal document for what feels like eternity, but what's more closer to about 9 months. And it's been a longer project than that, just in that, as a new generation of forest activists is coming of age and starting to work in this movement, there's been a lot of, I think it's been a pretty organic shift towards focusing more on kind of social justice issues, climate justice, rather than more of the traditional kind of conservation framework around forest defense. And so something, myself being really interested in, because I've been organizing with the Sunrise Movement here in Eugene and around the West Coast, and other climate groups, is how we can kind of help to raise this ascendant climate movement's awareness of the role that our forests here in the Pacific Northwest, and that the role that all natural climate solutions and landscape-oriented solutions can play in a national climate plan or a Green New Deal, or in kind of like the Biden camp's rhetoric, a building back better kind of framework. So really, the primary objective is not creating more work for our colleagues, but rather working to reframe some of our campaigns into this, like I said, this ascendant kind of climate justice framework, and also kind of recognizing the historic shortcomings of the conservation movement in uplifting the voices of frontline and historically marginalized communities, uplifting the voices of workers who've been disenfranchised both by automation and neoliberal policies, but also especially in media narratives, by conservation efforts. And so really working to create a framing and a platform that incorporates this language of in the ethics of a just transition for workers and for frontline communities as we move, towards what we can only hope to be a climate friendly future, or a future that has a livable climate, the very least. And so another piece of this too, right, is and what we hope to really incorporate from the Green New Deal is not just talking about climate mitigation, but also climate resilience. And so investments in communities and infrastructure to increase the resilience of our people in the face of the already baked in warming that we know is coming, and those results, which are, as we've seen, increased drought and wildfire. And obviously we have a bunch of really, really brilliant people here who could talk to me for hours about how climate and wildfire and, historic wildfires and et cetera. So I won't go into that, but especially in like the kind of common media narrative around how wildfire and climate change, wildfire is the harbinger, whatever that word is, of climate change, and how we can really start preparing our communities for that. And as I'm sure many of us on this call know, our forests in the Pacific Northwest are critical, not just to mitigating climate change, but to protecting our water sources, to creating more fire resilient communities, and ensuring a just and equitable future for residents in this region and around the world in years to come. So with that just kind of broad introduction, I just want to talk briefly about some of the objectives that we had going into this. I know I've kind of touched on some of them, but I want to just kind of explicitly talk about it. So reframing forest issues within a climate justice lens, raising awareness about the role of forest defense and climate mitigation on a national and regional level, informing progressive leaders at the state and national level about the role that forests can play, and bringing attention to the different policies that we've been advocating here at the Pacific Northwest, and different levels of government in the Pacific Northwest, and hopefully influencing their Green New Deal proposals or Green New Deal-esque proposals. And then lastly, and I think this might be most importantly, especially for myself being like a young person who's already starting to feel a bit jaded by playing whack-a-mole on public lands timber sales, right? And always just saying, no, we don't want this sale. No, we don't want this sale, is to create a positive platform for organizing. So instead of saying, no, we don't want this, we want to say, yes, we want this. This is the vision. This is the story that we're going to tell of a better world, a more just world, and what the policy will look like to get us there. And so the last thing I'm going to say here is that, and as I'm sure many of you noticed when you're reading the documents, is that these aren't policy documents. These aren't prescriptive documents. They're more broad kind of frameworks for what a Green New Deal would look like in the hyper-localized and specialized kind of niche that we know best in the Forest Climate Alliance of forest carbon and resiliency, that in the face of climate-driven wildfires, climate-driven droughts, and the other things that we know are coming. So that's just some broad context, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I guess one piece I also want to mention is that in this process, we really worked hard to try to bring in voices from frontline communities and Indigenous communities, BIPOC communities, and communities who have been disenfranchised, like former logging communities and others, economically by the timber industry and by heavy industry in the Pacific Northwest. And while that effort is ongoing, I do want to just recognize that we weren't extremely successful in engaging those voices. And so in this effort, we want to be really clear that we're open for feedback specifically from the folks who are going to be impacted the most by climate change and by policies to address climate change, and to create avenues for this to be a living document and a living project that we can use to further that engagement and further our alliances with communities that, you know, historically haven't been engaged in forest conservation, and for many of them for very specific reasons, such as, you know, the settler colonialism inherent in talking about public lands, and, you know, environmental racism that has been a present kind of aspect of conservation, especially here in the West. So with that, I'll pass it back to Sam to get us moving. But I know, you know, there's a lot to talk about here, and I can only cover just a small piece of it. But yeah, I guess last thing I'll say is just a huge thank you to all the folks who provided input and who've been working with us every step of the way. I'm really excited about this project, and I think that it can, you know, hopefully create a catalyst for future work and growth in our movement, and help us be more successful.
Nice.
Thanks, Dylan. I'm gonna just pass it off to Andrew because that's the next piece.
Thank you, Dylan. That was really informative. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We want this to be a conversation. I think we'll get the most out of this, hearing what y'all's opinions, thoughts are from reading the document. I hope you all have had a chance to take a look at the materials, the several different things that we sent, the main document, the executive summary, our opportunities for action, working document, HR 109. You know, there's a lot of materials. So hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at those. I'm going to paste in the chat right now Google slide deck. So what we're going to do is, I think the first part is kind of just going to be, we're going to break out into breakout rooms, and we're going to talk about the different pillars that we put together for the document, the Pacific Green New Deal for Pacific Northwest Forests. Those are recognizing the role of the Pacific Northwest forests in meeting the scale and urgency of the climate crisis, empowering disenfranchised and historically marginalized communities, transitioning away from industrial logging, guaranteeing decent jobs and raising the standard of living, investing in Pacific Northwest communities, and acting on the best available independent science. So each breakout room is going to cover three or a couple of those pillars, and we'll offer a guided discussion. We've got several questions, so if you're able to look at that slide deck, we've got some questions here that kind of are going to guide our conversations in the breakout rooms. But we can go into, you know, whatever folks are thinking about, whatever folks are, you know, what interesting things have been spurred in your thoughts from this document. What are we missing? What can we do better on? These kinds of conversations. We really want to hear from you about that. So, and this is, you know, like Dylan said, we've been working on this for 9 months now. We've taken a lot of input. It's definitely been a work in progress, and I don't think it's perfect, but we look forward to hearing your thoughts and talking through this. So with that, I think we might just go into our breakout rooms.
Yeah, we also might want to share, MC has put together a great Google slideshow for us that we are going to use to take notes and stuff while we go. So maybe MC, if you could drop that link in the chat, just so folks have it, so that when we're in our breakout rooms, we can see the questions. But Andrew, do you want to just kind of like read over the questions for this first round, just so people know what we're getting into?
Yeah, so we came up with 3 questions. How can we ensure that our platform is speaking to a broad audience and speaking across the aisle to timber-dependent communities? What does a just transition for forests and forest-dependent communities look like? How do we ensure the Green New Deal benefits all Americans? And what significant impact or changes do you want to see coming from this document in your work? So those are our main questions. And Sam MC and I will be running each breakout room, and we've got a list of other guiding questions as well. If we get into some of the deeper conversation, but I think we want to hear from you all.
Awesome. Okay, so you should have the link to the slideshow. Dylan, I just made you host, and I'm wondering if you can figure out how to separate into breakout rooms. It's usually easy, but it's not showing up on my end for some reason right now.
And if we don't have it at this meeting, we can just have a conversation with the whole group. I think that would be fine.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of us though, so it would be good to do it. And it usually is an option, but for some reason it's not showing up.
I don't know how to do breakout rooms.
So funny. I've done this a bunch, but it's getting...
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either.
Weird.
It's probably like a setting on the back end of your Zoom that like we won't be able to fix on this call.
Great. Well, sorry folks, that's kind of a bummer. We really wanted to have like smaller group discussions, but yay technology and COVID. But we still want to spend this time. We have about 30 minutes for each of the discussions, and let's just, since it is a big group, let's just remember like kind of the step up, step back principle. So, you know, share your piece, but make space for others because there's a lot of voices. We can try and facilitate just like if you raise your hand or throw in the chat, you can just say stack or me, and we'll know who's next, but try not to just like jump in because there probably will be a stack. Yeah, so I think that can work fine. Do you want to just go for it, Andrew?
One other thing, so now that we have this slide, so another this slideshow, people can jump in, and on slides 3 through 5, there's a little text boxes. If you don't get called on, we don't have a time for your comment, or if you just want to write something in, that is totally a great way to provide your feedback, and we'll be using those comments as well. So feel free to use that functionality to share, and we can even read some of those anyways. So just jump right in. If anyone has any initial thoughts, you know, how is this platform speaking to a broad audience, and how can an idea like the Green New Deal reach across the aisle to timber dependent communities? What are some folks' thoughts on that?
Rachel's saying that it's saying we need permission to do more than view the slides, so we can send an editable version.
I just changed.
Chandra.
Okay.
Oh, well, I was just to kick us off on that question. I mean, speaking to traditionally timber dependent communities, when we're talking about what they'll what many will interpret as taking away their work, their careers, their jobs, is to focus on the economics of what we're proposing. You know, what are jobs that people could have in the woods, or in a rebuilt community that's not associated with work in the woods. And that's, I think a great opener for many communities and many people who may not be traditionally aligned with the conservation community.
Great. I see that Carol has her hand up.
Yeah, this is unfortunately more putting concerns out there than answers, but living in rural Josephine County, traditionally timber dependent community, there's really a cultural issue that I think is the heart of your question. And the issue of union jobs, or that offering of union jobs, really needs to be framed in a way that breaks through this right-wing cultural right to work kind of framework, because there's an underlying anti-union message that I think is being hit very strongly in the Republican rhetoric. So it's just something I wanted to throw out on the table as a consideration. Thanks.
Brenna.
Hi, everyone. I'm having camera trouble, so I'm sorry you can't see me. I think Carol is absolutely right about the cultural issues, and I think that that's honestly more real than the job issues because timber jobs have been declining for so long. And, you know, all those recent graphs about jobs and volume show that jobs are still on the decline, even though we're logging more volume in Oregon than we have. Like at post 2008 recession, jobs stayed flat or even got lost while timber volume increased, right? So the facts are the jobs are not coming back because volume is increasing. But I really think that this is one of those issues where facts don't matter so much. It's all about perception. And this has been going on for a long time. You know, there were mill workers who were getting laid off in the timber wars. You might have remembered them like yelling in the background, this is about exports, it's not about owls. Like people know this, but the industry has been extremely savvy on placing the job loss on environmentalists and not on its own overcutting and its own mechanization. So it's strange because the facts don't support more logging equals more jobs, right? Like the facts around jobs are on our side. Like there's way more jobs in the woods that aren't about extraction, but it's the cultural issue. And then I think it goes to the question of who is the messenger? And unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, most of us on this call are not the right messenger because we are already branded with that environmentalist stamp that makes it so the predisposition is to not believe us. So I just want to kind of bring that question in, is how do we broaden who's talking, having these conversations to bring in people like Carol was saying, maybe more union people or people who might be listened to as we're talking about where the jobs really are and how to support these communities being more self-reliant.
Great. Really good point, Brenna. MC.
I was going to say kind of to Brenna's point and to Madeline's in the chat about, you know, we were looking at this under the lens of originally like 3 groups about reaching out to climate-oriented allies, some decision makers, and frontline communities. And so, and then, you know, bringing up union concerns and stuff like that. So that's all very pointed. And so I guess a question I'd like to pose maybe to get some feedback from everybody is, you know, how are we going to ensure that we're talking to these people and we're getting the right information? We've, as Dylan was saying in our intro, we've been trying to reach out to quite a few groups and have had some limited success. And so I'm kind of posing it back to our Alliance members of how do you think, or what resources do we currently have available that we could try to help get this document out to get more voices heard or have it apply to more people, and if anyone had ideas on that lens.
I see Gail raising your hand. You're on mute, Gail.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You're cutting out a little bit. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
A little bit.
Forget it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we can't really hear you, Gail.
Gail, you could try putting your question in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, if you type it in, maybe.
But I saw, not to cut you off, Andrew, I saw that Chandra posed a really good question about, is saying the green problematic when trying to broaden our reach? And so would love to hear people's thoughts on that.
That's a good question. Yeah.
I would add something to that, and also just ask a reminder if folks aren't speaking, if you could mute, because we're getting some background noise. But we have talked a lot about this, and I'm super interested in what people are thinking. I mean, we've been working really hard on developing this platform and gaining widespread support and sign-on under the platform of a Green New Deal, which we recognize is a pretty like polarizing term, and might not be what we want to, how we want to sell these concepts in certain circles. Like, even if we still are forwarding these ideas, it might not make sense to advance them, you know, in across the aisle under the platform of a Green New Deal, which at this point is like, has a lot of like lefty connotation attached to it no matter what. So yeah, just adding to that question.
And I do want to just contextualize too, you know, in the initial thinking, and I think I highlighted this in some of our objectives, but in our thinking, right, a lot of this was the national progressive movement that it's like really done more to forward, you know, climate action in the past 2 years than we've seen in decades and decades, is talking about all of these different things, but they're really failing to talk about any of the issues that are really critical here in the Pacific Northwest. First and foremost being forest carbon, right? We hear about how the Amazon is the lungs of the world and how, you know, the US and other countries are gonna like place sanctions on Brazil because they're logging too much. Yet for some reason, even the most progressive climate allies in DC are not talking about the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest and the role that they can provide in mitigating climate change and increasing resilience. And so, you know, I think these are really valuable conversations we're having about like some of the local politics and how we can reach rural folks who've been polarized by the culture wars, right? Where, you know, because that's what it is, right? Is like, as soon as they hear anything coming from like a quote unquote, you know, libtard, Pantifa, whatever, they're gonna like just tune out, don't care. But I think the critical thing is thinking about how we can uplift this issue to our allies while at the same time working to make our movement more inclusive of people who would be inclined to support, like, you know, critical justice and environmental work, but maybe who have felt alienated by the predominantly white, predominantly, you know, affluent or middle class conservation movement, and how we can expand, you know, our potential allies rather than trying to reach out to people who are kind of, in my opinion, in a place of like cultural polarization that there's not a ton that we can do. And I realized, sorry, I just like said some things that could have been triggering for folks. I was, you know, quoting from the right, but I realized that might not have been the most appropriate thing.
I see a comment from Samantha Trillo about communicating with labor unions, which is something that we've talked about. We haven't, as a working group, put a lot of time into that. Maybe we'd love to hear some more about that, and then we'll jump to Lauren and then Chandra. If you feel like sharing, Samantha.
Hi. Yeah, so log exports, yeah, I understand you're explaining that this Green New Deal for forests is not addressing specific policy points, specific policies, but sorry for that. So it may actually, though, be beneficial to have some, if we found support among other entities like unions, like the AWPPW. I mean, I know that they, you know, so log exports are also, you know, obviously a major problem for jobs in the forest, but also very much an environmental problem. And I mean, there's still, as far as I know, log exports from BLM in kind of a roundabout way.
Great. Lauren.
Yeah, I think that it's really helpful when you're talking to timber dependent communities that are, transitioning away from that. Family sustaining jobs is a term that definitely has a lot of appeal, and actually being able to point out those examples. I know in talking with some colleagues, there was an example of someone who had worked in the logging business for generations within their family. I think this was in the Tongass National Forest, and they transitioned to retrofitting and installing culverts in a way that allowed better fish passage and dealt with some of the impacts of flooding and kind of modernized a lot of the infrastructure. And that job actually paid much more than they were making in the logging industry. So I think having those people tell their stories, I think they're the ones that are ultimately going to be better messengers in these communities than any of us can be.
Yeah, that's important, the messenger piece. Brenna brought that up as well. So we've got maybe, a little under 10 minutes, 5 minutes or so to continue on this discussion topic. We won't have be able to reach everyone's comments. Please use those slides once again if you have ideas or thoughts. Oh, I see people are doing that. That's great. Anybody else have a comment, and then we can jump to our next
I think Chandra was on stack then.
Yeah, sorry, Chandra.
That's okay.
And also Stephen, he hasn't figured out how to put it in the chat, but we can call him next.
Great.
Well, I guess I wanted just to say we started to take this tack a minute ago around, if using, the Green New Deal terminology for, to reach national policymakers and ally with, or reach the groups that are using that, but maybe not talking about forests. And I guess that's, kind of another big question in my mind is, yes, reaching communities who are most affected by climate change and by this transition, this transition to a new economy is important, but are they the ones that are going to help us, actually enact new policies and, get investments towards the work that needs to happen on the ground and, and work to create this change? Or is it the decision makers and the policy makers? And so are they the most important ones to be reaching? And so that gets to this decision maker slide, I guess. But eventually, of course, we need to have allies in communities that are most affected. And we want to make sure that we're considering their concerns, and we're sort of trying to elevate all of this to national groups or decision makers in DC or wherever. But it's not necessarily those rural communities who are going to help us make the change. So we need to be able to talk about this in ways that, really resonate with the decision makers as well.
Sam, who was the next person up? I'm sorry.
Stephen, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just had a thought. I'm not sure how this would work, but we've been hearing a lot about in the news, especially since Biden has been elected, about the transition to renewable energy and how that's the future, and that coal is on the decline. And I think there's a general recognition that that's true. And I kind of see a parallel between that. It's not a perfect parallel, but between that and the transition to sort of climate-friendly forestry. In that the old way of doing things is no longer works. Our forests are at grave risk of wildfire and disease and pest infestations of all kinds. And it's time to transition to new practices that promote storage of carbon and improve the health of our forests that have been, were suppressed by fires and managed as plantations for decades. And, I think there's been a lot of selling of the switch to renewables as a way of creating new kinds of jobs that are going to be more sustainable into the future. And that there might be some way of framing that, sort of latching on to that, idea that's seems to be gaining in acceptance and popularity, and drawing comparisons to as a kind of way of selling this idea of changing the way things are, the way we manage our forests.
Great. Good. So I think we might move on to our next topic, unless there's one last comment that someone wanted to make. Next, we're going to go into more of a how does this connect with the work that people are currently doing? We're not trying to make a whole new list of tasks, a whole new campaign. We want to see what you all are doing and connect it to this work, be supportive, be good allies. So let's jump to that. And Sam, did you have a?
Yeah, I could jump in. Yeah, just to reiterate, this is so fast, and we only have an hour and a half for all of this, and we're not going to come out with answers to all these questions, but there's been a lot of really good discussion in the chat too. And I know that probably a lot of happening in y'all's minds right now in response to this. So please do put your thoughts on that slide. It would be on the slides. We would love to kind of like review that stuff later and let that inform our work. So this next section is about where all of this stuff actually starts to become, material. And we wanted to kind of frame this conversation, the lens of this conversation, as not trying to be prescriptive about what exact policies we want right now down to the letter, or which ones are currently in the legislature that we do and don't support. And we don't want to get into the weeds of pulling apart specific policies. But what we do want to do is try and kind of get a better understanding of the shape that certain policies could take on a local, state, and federal level that would be basically enacting or reflecting the pillars that we've talked about in this Green New Deal platform. So like Andrew said, really want to hear what you all are doing specifically and how this aligns with your work. So on that policy brainstorm discussion questions slide, which is slide number 6, there is a link to the Opportunities for Action document. If you want to pull that up again, it's a good resource. We did send it around beforehand. This is a document where things kind of, we tried to flesh out some categories of local, state, and federal policies that would address the pillars in the Green New Deal. And so I do want to also say that, it says at the top, but really clearly, you signing on to this platform does not mean that you endorse all of these policy avenues. It means that, you are willing to engage in an ongoing discussion about how we can make this platform come alive. And this is a living document, and we expect it to be. So please help us grow and change it and shape it. So I'm not going to go through this entire document, but I will just highlight the sections, because what we're going to be doing for this portion of the discussion is thinking about each of these sections under 3 different kind of questions. And those questions are, A, what efforts are currently happening that already align with this platform? So what are you all already doing, or what are you aware of that aligns with each of these sections? What can we build on rather than tear down and start over? The second lens question is who, so the question of, who are our allies? Who already is supporting this work? Whether they're in this room or not, we wanna build those bridges. And then the third question is, what are the major obstacles in place? Who are our opponents? So that's the lens. We're kind of, we were going to do this in breakout rooms. So I think probably the best way to structure this section is to just go lens by lens. So we can start with what efforts, or maybe we want to tackle it actually like section by section. So we could like dig into a topic. So the different sections are mitigating the climate crisis. So how forests can do things like store carbon, and sequester carbon rather than be carbon emitters. Advance responsible forestry on private lands. So that whole section deals with industrial forest management on private lands and how we can change that. The third section is protect and enhance forest ecosystems on public lands. So as we all know, those two areas are managed very differently. And so we created different sections to kind of address the different needs. The next section is help forests and communities thrive with wildfire. Then we have protect forest waters. So forest and watershed, drinking water and fish issues. And then invest in a just transition. This deals with jobs and an economy. And then advance transparency, equity, and inclusivity. And then take direct action from best available science. And so this is a lot. We do not need to go through every one of it, but I think what it makes sense is if someone wants to start with a thought about one, then we can just focus on that section, dig into it, and then we can go to the next section and we can look at it through those three lenses. What's already happening, who are our allies, and what are our obstacles? I see Alex's hand first, and then I'll monitor the chat. It would be great if everyone could use the chat because there's a lot of us and it's hard to see everyone's face boxes. Alex.
Well, I want to make sure my comments are organized within this larger discussion that y'all are framing up. I was hoping to bring up efforts to tackle private industrial forest land, which to me seems like the greatest and most important conservation challenge relating to forests in the Northwest. Not to undermine the work that goes on federal lands, extremely important, and we need that to continue. But if we're going to grow this movement, I think we really need to grow into offense. In other words, we need to, instead of always responding to industry and being defensive and saying, no, actually, the science says this, I think we should be looking at this climate crisis as an opportunity to go on offense. And one of the tactics that I believe in, I know several of you have heard me talk about this before, is before, and I just want to say, just for the next 45 seconds, what community forestry is, and I would love to hear what you all think. Essentially, it's using public dollars to buy private land, decouple it from private ownership, and put it into either ownership or governance and management of a local community. The forests are generally still logged. They are not clear cut. They are not replanted with plantations. In general, ecological forest management is used to selectively thin forests and to promote older rotations, longer rotations, to promote biodiverse species composition, to promote watershed protection and restoration. All the things I'm talking about are inherently labor intensive. And this is one of the biggest reasons that industry shies away from this kind of forestry. You need a lot of people with chainsaws and with all sorts of different trainings, backgrounds and different tasks to use science, to use a nuanced management approach to restore watersheds, to produce wood products while simultaneously managing for other values. Sorry I'm talking so long, but one more sentence. This is important because it shows rural communities that there are alternatives to industrial logging. We can produce wood products, we can have jobs in the woods without subjecting the forest to clear-cut plantation forestry. It helps us adapt to climate change, it helps us fight climate change. So there's my plug for community forestry.
Thank you, Alex. I think a lot of people were plussing what you were saying in the chat. I want to pitch, Andrew, do you want to just say a word or two about the Coast Range Association's proposal? That seems to fit right in here.
Yeah, so, we're framing this in a, what are people working on that fits in with this agenda? The Coast Range Association recently released a Green New Deal proposal for industrial forests. Alex, thank you so much for that, eloquent whatever about community forestry. We are all about that at the Coast Range Association. Our proposal, I'm going to put a link to it in the chat right here, is about that, specifically talking about the opportunity that a Green New Deal, the climate crisis, you know, we're in an emergency. Things that couldn't happen in what we could imagine couldn't happen, can happen in a time like this. It's an opportunity to focus on industry. You know, I think that messaging probably resonates with communities across the spectrum. You know, Weyerhaeuser, do they care about their workers? Are they paying attention to the well-being of the people on the ground, those communities? I think you can hear that that's people who are living in those situations are not are experiencing that, you know, subjugation. So anyways, this proposal that the Coast Range Association has put together goes into detail about a potential land reform, social benefit, community forestry agenda. And there's a lot of good information in there. I hope folks can take a look at that. Lots of information about how the industry functions and how they're exporting value, profit from these communities.
Thank you, Andrew. Darlene, did you also want to add something about private industrial forestry issues? You're on mute.
So I think the thing that is the most realistic in the near term, I don't know about just the feasibility of this thing of buying up these industrial forests and having communities manage them. It seems like kind of pie in the sky, although it might work. But the thing that I think has a real potential in the near term would be changing forest practices to expand the watershed protections within industrial forest, because that is something that affects so many Oregonians because of the watershed issues, the drinking water that is impacted. And I think that there's would be a really wide support for that. And if we get a new Board of Forestry, get a better chance of addressing that.
Thanks, Darlene. Let's do one more comment from Linda on this section, and then let's jump to another section of y'all's choice.
Yeah, can you hear me? Thank you, Alex. Oh my God, yes, I'm so on the offensive side of this as well. And so thank you for articulating that. I do want to throw out, though, the idea of buying land or changing that scale of forestry requires our state legislators. There is nobody else. They are the decision makers. They are the ones that are either going to stand with us or against us to do something like that. And so I've long thought that this collective of people that feel so passionately about this need to start a lobbying organization that is in Salem all the time, speaking directly to not just the ones that agree with us, but also the people that don't. Because I don't know how else we're going to change the policies that come out of Salem addressing forestry without a lot more pressure.
Thank you, Linda. So I want to shift us into one of the other myriad sections, but just to summarize, I'm hearing that folks are really excited about doing offensive work, that it's important, and that there's a lot of umbrellas that we could do that, and a lot of people doing it, including focusing on drinking water and focusing on community trusts and transference of private industrial land to communities. Alex, I see your hand. I want to switch to the next section. Do you want to say one more thing about this?
Really quick, just to flag for Oregon folks, I am from Oregon. I live in Washington now. Washington State has a new community forest program. They allocate tens of millions of dollars so communities can buy private industrial forest land. So it feels like pie in the sky, we can never do this, but it's happening in Washington. We can do it in Oregon too. And the idea is to leverage federal dollars to be dumped into this as well. So we can do it. We need to challenge the assumption that it's impossible.
Thank you. Does anyone want to get us started on one of the other sections taking a look at one of the other areas through those lenses.
Real quick, Sam, is it okay if I give a quick overview of federal stuff as another kind of area of work that we're already working on?
Yeah, jump us into the public land section. We can talk about that next.
Okay, cool. So as you know, part of the Pacific Northwest Forest Climate Alliance, there's a federal policy working group, and a lot of that definitely closely aligns with the work the Green New Deal group is doing. So I guess I'll just go real quick and highlight a couple of the specific policies that we're looking at. We're specifically calling on the Biden administration to take executive action to halt all mature and old growth logging on public lands in Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and in the Tongass National Forest as well. So this is something that probably a lot of you are already familiar with. And I'm definitely, as part of that ongoing work and the push that we're making around it, I'm always looking for opportunities to elevate social justice issues, equity issues. And so I think that a lot of that work does definitely closely align with the Green New Deal work. So any ways that we can combine those efforts would be really awesome. And then I'm also working within the OCAP coalition around the governor's executive order, and working in direct engagement with the Oregon Global Warming Commission, the Board of Forestry, and the Oregon Department of Forestry, elevating climate smart forestry practices, and also social justice equity issues as well. So that is another platform where there's ongoing work where it would be really great to plug in this effort. And we might get a conservation majority on the Board of Forestry and actually be able to do something for once. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, huge kudos to everyone on this call who made that happen too, or is working on that. This is a powerful crew here. Lots of stuff happening in the chat. Samantha, do you want to summarize what you put in there with a lot of good ideas? You are on mute, so we cannot hear you if you're trying to talk, but if you also just want to leave it in the chat, that's totally fine. Okay, well, I'm going to go to the next person, but Samantha dropped a bunch of really great ideas for federal land stuff in the chat. Chandra, do you want to elaborate on your question?
Oh, well, it's just thinking about it's jumping back, unfortunately, but thinking about the private lands and, another model outside of the community forestry model that I don't know much about, which is why I put it, it's something like carbon markets or carbon reserves, or creating carbon reserves out of private forests, from an investment standpoint. So I'm not sure if the Coast Range Association's report goes into that at all, but there's a lot of interest internationally in having carbon offsets, right? Or investing in carbon reserves, and could our forests be a part of that? So it'd be another way of buying up private land to place them into a better management system. So again, I don't really know much about it, just kind of an interesting idea to throw out there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so
I think there's a opportunity there. We do focus on community level, specifically trying to steer away from paying large industrial owners to store carbon, because that's leaving frontline communities behind. So really centering on the people who are most impacted by the crisis, both the economic crisis of the current system as it's working, and the climate crisis.
So we've kind of summarized a number of ways to get at this private lands issue, acquisition, land transference, and thank you, Lauren, for providing that really helpful summary of some of the initiatives happening on the federal public lands arena. I want to know if anyone has anything else to add under those three lenses: obstacles, allies, ongoing work for either public or private lands. And then in the last bit of time for this discussion, I think it would be great if we could switch into either talking about the just transition piece or the equity and inclusivity piece, which is a really important, obviously, piece of this puzzle. This group has nothing to add about public and private land reform. Rachel, did you want to add something? Or MC, you talked about firewising homes and communities, which could be connected.
Yeah, I was going to say that in this kind of thing that we had put on the opportunities for action about incentivizing firewise communities kind of fits in a lot of different of the topics that we're covering, but one specifically would be just transition, and posing this more as just an idea that people can get behind is, you know, we're trying to pull industrial logging out of national forests or on private lands, and trying to really take those people who already have a really awesome skill set and put it back into the community. And that can be either a regional or a federal funded job. And, you know, that's something that's taking a skill set that they already have and posing it to, you know, that could be our olive branch. And that could be a way that we reach out to these communities, or as I think Madeline said it earlier, like reaching out to firefighters and pairing together so that we could work together to get this message out to people. So I think that's one of my favorites as a fire nut. So I think that's a really cool opportunity there.
Yeah, and this is Rachel. I mean, I'll just echo what MC says. I mean, we need to have a shift from, you know, the forest end to the home out as far as engaging in the fire issues and what the actual problem with fire is, which is burning down communities and threatening people's property and lives, as opposed to being a natural process that restores our forests. So I think we did a pretty good job in the opportunities for action of covering the broader categories. As Chandra says, we could add specifics, 4 days, but protection has to just be at the top of the list. We've got the 30 by 30 initiative. I think a lot of national forest and BLM forest lands should be put into those protective categories. And we should give nature a chance to do its thing. I mean, our forests have been around for hundreds of millions of years, and they have a lot of biological knowledge and how to deal with changing climate. They've done it a lot. We're accelerating things, but the DNA memory is still there. And I think we just have to trust that if we protect nature, nature will protect us.
Great. I think that's a good kind of capstone on that piece. And as Chandra mentioned and Rachel just said, there's, you know, definitely recommend you all looking at this opportunities for action document. It is pretty thorough, but if you have additional ideas for those sections, we want to hear them for sure. But the last piece of this discussion, I think we should dedicate to really digging into the concept of a just transition. This is really like kind of the framework through which we want to do all of these things. We don't just want to like protect public lands and change management on private lands, but the, you know, the lens through which that's happening, the impetus is to support human communities, especially marginalized, underrepresented, and frontline communities. And we did some thinking about that a lot while writing this, and really are interested in y'all's thoughts. And Madeline brought up a good point in the chat, which I think is a good bridge to this discussion, which is, you know, what does it look like to do something like, you know, transference of private lands to public ownership, private industrial lands to public ownership under, you know, this background of the Lands Back movement for Indigenous communities. And that's just one way that, you know, the issues of equity overlay with this platform. So I just want to open it up broadly. Feel free to respond to Madeline's question or to another angle. But again, you know, we're really focusing on the pieces of who's already doing this, who are our allies, either here or that we need to bring in, and what are the obstacles? There's a lot going on in the chat, and I'm just assuming that if you put stuff in the chat, you might want to be called on. So I'll give you the opportunity, Alex, but feel free to pat, you don't want to, okay. And then Samantha again is responding in the chat, lots of stuff. Does anyone want to put stack if you want to say something to the group? Rachel.
Yeah, obviously I can't spell today. So with the lands back, I think there is a great opportunity to tie that into land trusts and maybe even community forestry, because most of the land that was stolen from Native Americans is actually in private hands right now. So I think that that offers an excellent opportunity to shift from corporate ownership and utter exploitation to cultural practices and traditional ecological knowledge. So that's what I would recommend.
Thanks. And Brenna just put a really great and really depressing link in the chat, which is a reminder and for those who want to get educated about, you know, whose land you're living on. But it's important for us as forest activists, obviously, to be thinking about this. Does anyone else want to contribute something to the conversation that we're having in this space?
I would jump in here if there's no one else on Stack. Yeah, I think that, you know, historically, I think I mentioned this at the very beginning, and I know Bark has done a ton of really, really important kind of discussion and education around this. And I believe y'all have a webinar tonight or tomorrow night. Tonight?
Yep.
Great. About like what, you know, quote unquote public lands are and how they or like how can we talk about public land within like a context of understanding settler colonialism and the seizure of land from indigenous people in the context of land back. So I just want to flag that that's a really I think critical conversation that we can be having right now. And Brenna, thank you for dropping the link in there. I really encourage folks to go. I know I'm going to be attending. And along those lines, how can we better build relationships with our indigenous communities in Oregon and throughout the Pacific Northwest? And this is something, like Sam said, that we spent a lot of time talking about and working on outreach for. And I know a lot of groups have, but I think that as a movement, it's something that we really strongly know that needs to be better and needs to have more effort put into. So that said, if we're going to have a just transition, it has to be led by the indigenous people who have lived on this land since time immemorial. And, you know, I think that, like I said at the beginning, this is going to be like a living effort and document and message. And so really wanting to just welcome people's ideas for like how to build those relationships, or if those relationships already exist, how to like start these conversations, and how can we better be partners and, you know, accomplices for indigenous, you know, compatriots in this effort to address climate change and protect our forested lands here in the Pacific Northwest.
Brenna.
Yeah, thanks. I want to pipe up. Actually, that first link I put in was for the Indigenous Environmental Network's Just Transition platform, which is awesome. And I was responding to that earlier question of what does it look like to do this? And luckily, Indigenous people are way ahead of us and have been thinking about climate change and just transition for a long time. So I'd encourage everyone to check out their platform. It's really instructive and it has a lot of overlap with what we're doing. And I think we can learn from their leadership on this. And then, yeah, since it got brought up, I will just put a plug in. Courtney Ray and I tonight are doing what we thought was going to be one webinar, but it's turning into the first of a series of 3 on basically how public lands came to be from sovereign indigenous nations lands. So tonight we'll be moving from the doctrine of discovery through the treaty making period with a focus on lands in Oregon. And I put that link in there. That's the second one I put in. You're all invited to do that. And I think, Madeline, we are going to record it. It's pretty popular. There's a lot of people already signed up, and it would be great because it does these questions of land ownership and even the structure of land ownership are all tied in to settler colonization. And like, I think understanding how it got to be this way is very helpful for us understanding what to do now and how to move forward in a better way.
Thank you, Brenna. We have another minute for this conversation or so, and then we're going to transfer into next steps because that's important. But I want to highlight, and I'm going to save the chat and we'll send it around after so everyone can have all of these resources. But Rebecca White just brought up a really good point that the Yurok Nation is doing a lot of good work around carbon storage as a means to protecting and reacquiring their ancestral lands, which is pretty amazing. And thank you, Brenna, for sharing that beautiful example, the just transition for Indigenous peoples, the Indigenous principles. And then Dylan also mentioned the Red Deal, which we took some inspiration from when putting this together. So all really good things. And Chandra posted the Tribal Climate Network at UVO. So all good resources. Does anyone want to add anything to kind of like wrap up this discussion piece before we transition to the next and final piece?
I could say just one quick thing. Just really appreciative of all the amazing comments. It's just exciting to see all the chat is going wild. And, you know, we're bringing so many different pieces together into one, or at least a unified vision moving forward. And I personally find it really exciting and really excited to work on this in the future with everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. And I guess just one thing too, to just wrap up this policy piece is just a reminder that we see this document and the Green New Deal platform for our forests as being useful to all of us to unite our efforts under a common umbrella and a common message that this is what we need and a just transition is what needs to happen next. So we hope that all of your organizations can find ways that your work and your goals fit under and can be supported by and bolstered by this platform. So, you know, we recognize that there are limitations obviously to the terminology like we hit on really early on, but for the purposes of like building bridges among our allies and kind of bringing some unity, we really hope that we can, all find ways to advance our work and work more together under this platform where it's appropriate and makes sense. So with that, I'm going to pass it to MC for the last piece, which is rollout and sign-ons, stuff like that.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, this has been awesome. I'm really excited. The chat has been going off, so that is always awesome to see. But I'm going to talk specifically about our rollout plan and some media resources that we have. So on slide 10 of the presentation, there's a picture there of where all of our information is kept. And that is the Pacific Northwest Climate Alliance Google Drive under working groups, and then specifically under the Green New Deal for Forests working group. And there you'll see the Pacific Northwest seed packet. And I'm just gonna quick put that link in the chat so everybody can quick open that if they'd like. And so in the seed packet, there's going to be quite a few things. We have a introduction, a sample social media calendar, a sample letters to the editor section, and some event ideas, as well as some social media content. And this is all going to be tied to our March 21st, which is International Day of Forests, big public launch. From then until now, we have about a month. And so I would consider everybody to start pushing this out to your networks, both in the Alliance and outside. Dylan just popped the sign-on Google form into the chat, so feel free to save that. And we will be circulating that out pretty frequently over the next month so that we have the opportunity to get this out as far as possible. So in that seed packet, one of the first things that you'll see is the social media resource. And that's going to be tied to our social media sample calendar. And I'm going to quick share my screen so that everybody could see that. Oh, wait, just kidding. Who's the host right now? Because they would have to let me do that.
It's Dylan. Right. You're in.
Dylan, do you mind sharing my screen, or I can just do this?
You should have now.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Cool. So can everybody see that then? Awesome. All right, so this is a sample social media calendar, and this is going to be, it might look overwhelming, but I promise all the work is already done for you. So this is all of March. And if you're going to be planning on participating in the March 21st launch date, I would suggest as for your comms team or your group or whatever, however you want to plug in, to start teasing ideas throughout the month. And then from the 21st to the 27th, would be our week of action. And you can plug in a bunch of different ways. You could host a webinar. You could hop onto a radio show or do a radio interview. And actually Andrew with Coast Range Association has their own radio show that him and Sam work and run together. Hugely suggest volunteering to maybe pop in for that and to touch base with them on how you can plug in. There's a good way to drop a blog. There's, our op-eds are going to be all tried to be released within that week. We would like to get a lot of them on the 21st. And so I will pause that there so we can come back to there. So that's just kind of an overview of the idea. In the seed packet, you'll find everything that you could possibly need. And most of it is already pre-written, unbranded content that you guys can use and disseminate throughout your organizations throughout anyway. There's prompts and all the language is pulled directly from our big document. And there's a social media toolkit specifically with tweets and Facebook posts, suggested people that we should tag and comment to, and a bunch of content that you can go through. And again, it's already done for you. So this part is literally just asking you to participate. We would love to see as many groups as we can using these resources and be a part of the rollout. And so segueing into the next part is going to be our ask. So we are going to, we're going to need some help getting these big pieces out to everybody. And so we have a list that we'll be sending around then of some op-ed topics and trying to solicit volunteers to submit some, or for people that we could get quotes from for press releases from different organizations, both in the Alliance or out. And we're hoping to get those at least by the week of the 14th, so the week before the 21st, as like the final due date for all of those. And so if you guys would like at any point in time to get in contact with us or have questions or would like to volunteer, please reach out to either me, Andrew, Sam, or Dylan. It would be really, really wonderful. And I'm sorry if I'm talking really fast. I get nervous in front of big crowds. So I think I've covered just about everything. One of the big things that I will push again is that the seed packet is all inclusive. Everything is in there, from graphics to pre-written blogs and to different submissions. So don't feel like we're asking you for more work. We're hoping that you can just plug in with us and help make this launch be as big as we possibly can. And I think I've covered everything. I went really fast, but unless if Andrew or Sam want to tag team anything I may have missed.
Yeah, so we'll be releasing this document out into the world for folks to see what we're working on as a unified front. Dylan posted in the chat at the bottom there. If your organization hasn't signed on yet, please do so. Share it with organizations that maybe haven't, are maybe a part of the Alliance, or we want to bring more people in and more organizations on this to get, the most support as possible. So please connect that with your networks.
And I will say that there will be, I'll be a little busy bee in our Alliance email threads. I will remind people about big days that are coming up on the social calendar, just try to plug in there. I'll set out another email to help push for sign-ons. And then if anybody is interested or again has questions or suggestions, feel free to contact any one of us. We're all really open and happy to help and accept help.
Thank you, MC. That was awesome. MC is amazing, everyone. Like, that is all her creation. So huge thank you to that. So yeah, just to reiterate, direct asks from us to all of you is, if you haven't signed on to the document, take a look, see if you have that conversation with your organization, please sign on. If you decide not to, let us know why. We're interested. We really want to, we want to learn from this, and we want to know what conversations you all are having. So that's number one. And number two is, do all the things that MC just suggested. Please help us get the word out. Take a minute, consider who you know that should sign on, send it to them, tell them why it's important. Let's make kind of like a wave under this platform if we can. So we have finished our official content early, which is totally a miracle. But I guess we could leave the next, you know, if folks want to stay on and ask a couple questions, if anyone has just like general questions, that's great. Maybe those of us who are responsible for this call can stay on. Other than that, unless any of y'all want to add anything, we can officially wrap up and just make ourselves available for any lingering questions. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining. Like I said, if folks want